Welcome to the Wild Conversation, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Alex Shootman, who is a proven senior field executive with 25 years of experience in all areas of revenue and profit generation for technology organizations. He's currently the CEO of Alkami Technology. He's led turnaround and growth in multiple organizations across 4 different enterprises. He's the author of Done Right: How Tomorrow's Top Leaders Get Stuff Done. He's able to achieve corporate objectives that are often in tension with an individual's motivations by leveraging the attributes of character, competence, experience, and willingness to learn. And if you've had a chance to watch Dr. McKenna's second TEDx, Whole Leaders Under Pressure, Alex is the leader in the Band-Aid story. So if you haven't listened to that, go have a listen. Alex, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Sabbath. I'm excited to be here with you and with Rob. Thanks for having me.
We are going to play a quick round of wild cards. I did not prep you for this, but it's going to be quick and deep and fun.
Is this like a Rorschach test?
A little bit, a little bit.
We have a deck of 50, but I just pulled out 10, and we'll just pick a number between 1 and 10. I'll go first, and then you can go, Alex. Rob will round us out. You can answer the question in 1 sentence, or you can tell a story. No pressure, but just from the gut. So I'll go first. I'll choose number 4, which is, are you more motivated by learning, experience, relationships, influence, stability, or calling? I am more motivated by experience. I like to be in the moment, learn as I go, and then be able to apply that and share that. Alex, pick a number between 1 and 10.
7.
Okay. 7 is, what important details on your agenda are a part of your bigger purpose?
What? Say the question again.
Yeah. What important details on your agenda are a part of your bigger purpose?
That's the getting it done, doing it right grid.
It's good. Love it. Dr. McKenna.
Number 8,
All right.
because it's still the best number in the world. I don't know why.
Looks like a snowman.
It does.
What is a humbling experience that made you stronger?
Being in a hot tub with Alex Shootman a bunch of years ago, and yeah, and having a bunch of Band-Aids on that I didn't know were there. That's going to be all we're going to say about that. But I think it made me stronger somehow.
I love it.
It improved my sense of humor.
It did. Sabbath, thank you for that. That is awesome. Alex, this is a long time coming, and I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you. For those of you who don't know, Alex and I have been friends for a long time now. Went through some things back in the day. I remember doing Leading Under Pressure with different teams that you worked with, and just great memories of that. Before we get started, what is going on in the life and work of Alex Shootman today? What's going on with you?
Well, we've got 4 kids, so that's exciting. 2 are well out of the house. They're roommates, 2 boys living together. We've got a daughter in university at George Mason in Fairfax, and we've got another daughter that just graduated. She's going to go to TCU. So that's on the family side. On the nonprofit side, we just merged our nonprofit, which was called The Refuge, with an amazing organization called Arms of Hope. And so we've got a 50-acre campus where at-risk moms are able to live with their children, probably for the first time, and get their high school diplomas, go to college, learn how to be with their kids. So that's pretty exciting. And then work's fun as well. It's a growing public software company, and so every day is a school day.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing with that nonprofit you described, because I remember when that was just a piece of land, right? And now it's like this functioning thing that's amazing. It's amazing to see that. When I first met you, I remember having these conversations around your role as a business leader. And I think when we met, you were at a chief revenue officer role, deeply embedded as a sales executive, and you had that experience, had worked beside a lot of different CEOs. And I remember talking to you about that number one and number two role that you were experiencing. And I just wondered if you would talk a little bit about that transition, because now you've been in the CEO role in several organizations, and I'm so curious about that experience, what it taught you, what you had to learn, what was different. What was that like?
I thought what I'd do, Rob, is maybe I'm going to describe a very specific moment that I recall, kind of where I understood that I was now the number one, and then just a general understanding of the job that's emerged over time. The
Mm,
moment actually occurred. The audit chair of the board of a previous company called me. We were having a conversation, and it was a discussion about when to take the company public. And he called me afterwards and just said, "Hey, today you became the CEO." The conversation with the board was, "Hey, there's these things that need to happen with the company before I'd feel comfortable taking the company public. If you don't want to wait for that, it's okay, and it's okay if you get another CEO. But from my perspective, if I'm going to be responsible for taking the company public, I want to make sure that these things are." And he called me afterwards and he said, "You became the CEO," and I was probably 9 months into the job.
wow.
"Today you became the CEO." So that was a moment of clarity. And then I think over time, what I've come to understand, Rob, is there are four things that only you can be responsible for as the CEO. There's lots of things that happen in the organization. There's lots of things you're responsible for, but there's four that only you can be responsible for. The first is to own and communicate the strategy of the company. The second is to drive the values of the company. The third is to deliver the economic outcome the investors expect. And the fourth is to hire and build the right first team. Everybody else can contribute to that, but you're the only person really that can own those four things. Coming to peace with the fact that I own those four things, and if they're not working, then it's my responsibility. One of the things that I live by is the first rule of solving a problem is figuring out who has the problem, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so if the strategy of the company is not clear, it's my problem. If we're not delivering the financial results, it's my problem. If the values of the company aren't being demonstrated, it's my problem. If I don't have the right direct reports and they're not operating as a functioning team, it's my problem.
One of the things I've always found fascinating about you, and I've told many people your story and recommended your book because of that, because there wasn't a book back when we first met. I've met, I know lots of different sales executives and chief revenue officers. That's going back to when you were that. And one thing that was always fascinating about you is that you were driven by a specific purpose. And I think I talked to you about this where I was thinking to myself, back in the day, I think I mentioned this, is that I wondered if the CEOs that you worked with would actually have been threatened by that, because you were bringing as a number two, you were bringing a pretty distinct and very specific drive in this whole. I remember it so well because it's so simple. That principle in your book is getting it done and doing it right. And the reason why, and Alex, it's come full circle for us because in our work on trust, it got me thinking deeply about the decades of research on leader and organizational effectiveness. And it's so funny. I didn't think I connected the dots back then to what you were doing. But if there's one fundamental principle that every single leadership, process or framework that's built on anything whatsoever that's of value is going to connect what we describe as the visible and the invisible, like the operational structures and the doing part, and then this invisible part that's oftentimes this includes all the things that are going on inside of human beings. What is this principle and this purpose thing that you designed, that you have structured everything you've done around for so many years now?
Yeah, it's if you think about a simple 2 by 2 matrix, where on the vertical axis, it's getting it done. On the horizontal axis, it's doing it right. It's just a very transparent conversation within the company, which is, look, if you're not getting it done, you're not doing it right. It's probably not a great place for you. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. Just not a great place for you. You need to go somewhere else where it's going to be a better fit. If you're doing it right, but you're not getting it done, you're made up of our DNA, but we're both and organization. So we're going to coach you. right? We're going to coach you, but sooner or later, you've got to achieve your objectives. The getting it done, doing it right is who gets the awards. That's who we lift up every quarter. They're known by name. We talk about them. There are culture carriers. And then if you're getting it done, but you're not doing it right, I'm going to fire you faster than anybody else.
Mm,
Because the minute that you make an excuse, the minute that you excuse anybody, the ability to not live up to the values of the organization just because they're accomplishing something, you end up destroying the culture of the organization. Now, this came to me, I can't explain it, Rob. I
mm,
took over a sales team. I was at the Westin in South Coast Plaza in Costa Mesa, and it was probably 2003, maybe 2002, 2003. And I didn't, and that organization had kind of lost its way in the way that it was dealing with the customer. And I needed to kind of frame what my expectations were going to be in terms of how the organization was going to evolve. And I just wrote it down on a little scratch pad that was next to the bed at the Westin in Costa Mesa. And I wrote down that little 2x2 grid. And what was fascinating to me is I really didn't have an understanding, Rob, of how people would connect to it.
uh,
And it's been so interesting that in every place, uh, so it's not that people connected to me, it's that people connected to the concept. And I think the reason why is the world tells people that they have to cut corners to win. And so they're always wrestling. And I'm one of those people. I think people are generally good, right? I know 4% of the world's a sociopath, so I'm sure there's some people that are bad out there. But generally, I think people are good and they want to do good work. They want to be proud of their work. They want to be in an organization that they can be proud of. And so I think they walk in with this cognitive dissonance of, okay, for me to be successful, I'm gonna have to cut corners, right?
mm, mm,
And then all of a sudden, when they're in a place that celebrates the people that do things the right way and accomplish their objectives over time, um, they get really attracted to that. I remember when we were first kind of installing this principle in this organization, and I had two VPs that were not behaving like VPs, and I got them both on a call. I said, "Your behavior shows me that you're not vice presidents."
mm,
One of them, who I'm good friends with to this day, uh, who became very effective, said to me, Alex, I'm just struggling because the last person in your job told me that I shouldn't be the only just person in an unjust world.
mm,
So it got downloaded to me supernaturally, which is great. Uh,
mhm,
it was originally just intended to try to shape a sales team. And then what I came to understand is that the concept is what people want to work in.
mm. And have you found that people sometimes default toward one or the other in that 2x2? Like, is that one of the points, is try to get them thinking about doing both of these things that sometimes we experience as like a tension or in competition with each other? Like, how do you find that? What do you?
Well, we start the conversation. So it's actually at our company right now, it's our performance management process. And to do this, I feel like to do this right, you have to get values to behaviors.
Mm-hmm,
And I could describe how the process that we went, actually a lot of coaching from Pat Lencioni that helped with the process. So it's our performance management process. Like you're sitting down and the managers got to have a conversation about what is it that are the objectives that you're trying to accomplish that are connected to what the company's trying to accomplish.
mm-hmm,
And what are the behaviors that demonstrate that you're living up to the values of the company? And are you doing that or are you not doing that? But we start the conversation with, you need to know this is a both and, right?
mm-hmm.
You need
Yeah,
to know this is a both and. If you're getting it done but not doing it right, you're going to get fired very fast. If you're doing it right but you're not getting it done, ultimately you have to achieve your objectives. So if you stay in that quadrant, it's still not going to be a place that you're going to work, right? So
yeah,
I think you have to be upfront to say this is a both and. Like you can't get
yeah.
the whole pass because we're a public company. We have investors, and the investors made a bet on us, and we have to deliver to the investors. That's who owns the company.
That connection between I know that we have pretty common language around that, getting it done and doing it right, where I would talk about in order to build trust, for example, you have to have both a clear operational structure and performance expectations and clear job descriptions. So it's difficult for people to become trusted or trustworthy if they don't know what the job is. You know what I mean? And then are held accountable, or even bringing themselves their own accountability to that. And at the same time, work with so many organizations that focus so much attention on what people are feeling and empathy and compassion and all those pieces. But if they're not actually making progress, you know what I mean? It's like I've seen it in nonprofits and for profits. It's like it's all over the place. It is such a very simple way of describing that you developed. And I know people have grabbed onto it. I've seen how people talk about that whole thing.
Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.
In your mind, what does trust have to do with the performance and the well-being of the people that you lead today?
Well, let me start with, I did hear Stephen M. R. Covey was on a previous podcast with you. I read the book Speed of Trust probably I think it came out maybe '06 or '07. I read that book, highlighted it, dog-eared it. It's been required reading in every company that I've been to. And what I really liked about what Covey did is took this nebulous thing, I don't trust you, Rob. What does that actually mean? Kind of broke it down to that, hey, it's character, it's competence, right? Character is integrity and intent, competence, capability and results. Now we can have an objective conversation, right? Uh,
Mm,
uh, Rob, you don't trust me, not because you don't understand my intent, not because you don't understand, you think that I'm acting without integrity, not because you don't think I'm skilled, but because I haven't gotten done what you needed me to get done. That's a
mhm,
very different conversation than I don't trust you. So we take that framework, and that's all the way through the organization, so that we're having a conversation on trust that's not a subjective conversation, that's got some teeth to it. And then within our executive team, we've developed some norms, right? So we
mhm.
have some identified norms that build trust. And we've got five of them, but I'm going to stick on the first one because this is the one that we have to work the hardest on. And we generated this based upon, we did a lot of personality tests, who we are as people. I mean, we've used insights, enneagrams, leadership 360, all these kind of things to figure out what's going to be the tendency of this executive team. And because our executive team is kind of a ready, fire, aim team, personality wise, the number one thing that we work on all the time is no blame bias. And I'll tell you why. To run a company, you have to get the truth.
Mhm.
But human beings are tribal, whether we like it or not. When we're talking to our superior, we change our conversation, right?
Mm.
It's who we are as people. And so if you go into a situation with blame bias and that becomes the culture of the organization, you're never going to get the truth of what's going on. And if you don't have the truth of what's going on, you can't improve the performance of the organization. So when I think about trust, a couple things. One is this framework that I totally stole from Covey that I love, that we use everywhere I've been, which allows me to talk about trust more objectively. And then the second is this norm that we have to have, which is no blame bias. Because if we don't have it, I'm just not going to get the truth.
How would you describe no blame bias?
If something's not performing in the organization, right? If we've messed something up with a customer, or we're late with a product, all the things, software companies are breaking all the time, and we're sitting there as a senior team, do we start with an assumption that the team that's working the problem messed it up?
Mm,
The team might have messed it up, But is that what we start with? Or do we start with the question of how did we as an executive team let this happen? What's happening within the company? That doesn't mean that we're paternalistic and we say, oh, nobody ever messes up and we never have a constructive conversation with somebody. Doesn't mean that at all. It just is, what's your posture in the very beginning? Is your posture, they must have messed it up and everything flows from there? Or is your posture, I bet we have good people who want to be proud of their work, who have tried their best to accomplish this. So let's start the problem decomposition from there. Humans always start with blame bias.
Mm,
This is a psychologically ingrained thing. It's a survival mechanism for us as human beings. So we always start with that must be a bad driver, right?
yeah,
Or like anything in your life, you start with blame bias. And so I really, that's the one thing we work on the most, Rob, is
yeah.
uh, trying to keep the blame bias out of the situation.
It reminds me of, all that leading under pressure work we've done over the years and that composure under pressure. And Edwin Friedman, who is one of the founding thinkers in that whole area of self-differentiation and what it means to show up well. I remember he was asked in front of a bunch of executives, they asked him, what's the litmus test for the person with the most capacity to lead? And he said, the person who can express himself with the least amount of blame. He said, because it's a person who can define themselves continually. They understand who they are. They're working hard at connecting to others. They're avoiding triangles. They're working on dyadic relationships where I'm going to talk to Alex, so I have a problem with Alex instead of talking to somebody else about Alex. And so it was reminding me of that. Such
Best
powerful.
coach, I'll tell you I got the funniest and best coaching from uh, from Bob Beecham. He had been the CEO at BMC, and I got to work with him for a lot of years. And when I first became a CEO, it was great. He called me up, and we were having a coaching conversation. He gave me a lot of great tips, but at the end, he goes, "Here's my most important tip that I'm going to give you, Alex." He said, "From now on, all your jokes are funny, no matter how many times you tell them." And if you think about what's behind that, it's really good advice, which is, dude, you are going to have to work your rear end off to get the truth.
That's so interesting. One of the things I think that's interesting, I want to, if we could talk about the doing it right part for a second. So when I talked with Stephen Covey, one of the things that was so interesting in rereading Speed of Trust, he talks in that book over and over again about that you can measure it. You can measure trust. He says he hammers it. And um, in my next book, I'm hammering that. So when I reread his book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's saying it over and over again. But he talks about the reason why you can measure it is because you can measure the outcomes of cost and speed. So if you can measure decreasing costs and increasing speed, you can measure trust. And the reason why that conversation was so powerful was because I didn't start with trust. We started off providing a system for developing people in leader capacity. But you know that the things that I was working on were about developing individual leader capacity with a vision toward how they could invest in others. But we weren't out to chase trust. But as people were getting out of the vacuum of leadership training and actually talking about their awareness together systematically over time, that the biggest outcome was they started to trust each other. So we were basically providing a scaffolding for self-understanding. And then when it was shared together, it became team understanding. And of course, as they start to get to know each other with a little bit of structure, they started to trust each other. And so we were able, what was fascinating for me in that conversation with him was he said you can measure it because of the outcomes. And then I asked him at the end, I said, what's the future? What do we have to be doing next? And he said, we need to understand the drivers. We need to understand the fundamental levers we can pull, which is what we did. We focused on that other side. So I was getting excited about that triangulation. It was kind of cool, but actually kind of shocked some people that two of the drivers, especially at the team level, but also at the individual level, were performance and reliability. So like when you talk about getting it done, and this is just like such a fundamental truth that if a person is not making progress, you know what I mean? And it's not making progress, not just for them, but for their team and their organization. It is very difficult to trust them. Like, will you say more about that? I'm just downloading some of those findings. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, especially when you get to an executive role. And you got to understand, Rob, all I've been in since 2007 or so, or these, software companies, 20 million to 200 million, 100 million to 300 million, so I haven't been in very large institutions. So my comments are in the water that I swim in. When you get into these roles, especially an executive role in these organizations, you're expected to get stuff done, right? And
Yeah.
it's really visible whether or not you're getting stuff done, and people need you to get stuff done. And so the it's your currency. I mean, at the
Hmm.
end of the day, I was sharing this with one of our executives because we're going through some transformation, and I said, you don't have just because you're smart and you have experience, you don't yet have permission from the organization to make the changes that you want to make. And
Mm,
me telling the organization to listen to you isn't permission. Permission is the organization is looking at you and saying, I'm going to follow this person through the changes that they need to make. You need permission from your team when you're doing big things, right? Now, that
mm,
doesn't mean your team, we talk about this internally, right? Input is not a vote. Company's not a democracy. Leadership is not a democracy, right? But when you're trying to accomplish big things, the team needs to give you permission to lead them to do big things, right? And
mm,
the only
mm.
reason they give you permission is if they see that you have a track record. And they have to see your track record. Like it doesn't matter if you have a track record in 9 other places, right? They have to see it. So that's why I think the getting it done piece is so important, especially at the executive level.
Yeah. So I know you had a chance to read our State of Trust at Work report, and I'm kind of curious, as you were going through that, what stood out to you as important?
The part that caught my attention the most in the data set where you've got the really high performing organizations, and even in the high performing organizations, there were significant portions of the organization that were in what I would call the trust desert, right?
Hmm.
So I think that was the part but then I started thinking about it, Rob, and I'm going to give you an analogy. Is something that we talk about in our company all the time. Basically, I took an old Ernest Hemingway quote and I bastardized it for for the software industry. And it goes like this: growth breaks all software companies, and afterwards, many are stronger at the broken places.
Hmm.
Those that will not break, growth kills. So what I see, here's the analogy. What I see happen in our organization, and this was the part of your data that really surprised me. What I see
Mm.
happen in our organization is functions are broken all the time because the way you used to do it won't work because you've grown out of it. And the way that you need to do it, you haven't done yet. So you're not going to do it right the first time anyway, right? So
Yeah.
you're in this kind of concept. And so that's what I took away. I'm like, oh, trust is breaking all the time.
Yeah.
Right. So in even in a very high performing organization, trust is breaking all the time. And so so I have to manage trust. Trust is like a business function, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I walked away with that going, okay, trust is breaking all the time. That means I have to manage trust all the time. It's not something that I've set and now it's in place.
Yeah. It's one of the most powerful moments I've seen over and over again is when we're debriefing our trust index with a CEO. And many of them, and these are really sophisticated people, have this assumption that their job is to just get all distrust out. You know what I mean? It's like, let's just clean it all out. Like you can even see them looking at the data, trying to figure out where the pockets are.
Who
And
do I fire that
and
is
even like in
not
big
managing
organizations
people
where
to
they're like,
trust?
I think I know who that person is. It's like they're trying to, and when that data is so in some ways freeing because it's one of the statements I made in there and is that so many often we assume that trust is ubiquitous and I use that word because it's a great simple way of saying that if trust is somewhere, it's everywhere. But instead, what we found is that a big high percentage of people are functioning in what we describe as a jungle where there's low team trust and there's low organizational trust, even in strongholds of trust. So, where the organization itself profiles as a stronghold, there's always going to be people, to your point. And this is a big thing that I would want our listeners to hear is that, like you just said, trust has to be maintained. Like it has to be built and worked on and sustained, and it's a moving and breathing and living thing. Amazing.
And one of the things, you know, Rob, you
Yeah.
and me used to talk about a long time ago, um, if you're if you're in a leadership role, so if you're going to maintain trust and you're in a leadership role, you have to make believable, observable sacrifices.
Mm,
Where a sacrifice is just the choice of something important over something else important. That's the definition of a sacrifice. And there's four that we make. And so what I kind of walked away from your report going is, okay, on these four, am I continuously doing this? So it's how we spend our money, how we spend our time, how we spend our ego, and how we spend a previous value. Money and time are pretty easy. Ego is if I say one of our values is the customer is the North Star. If I do something that violates the value, I got to stand up in front of the company and say, I need to tell you about a situation. I'm not talking about going to the confessional, but like I need to tell you about a situation where I didn't live up to the values of the company. This is what
mm,
it is. This is unacceptable to me. And then if there's a value that runs counter uh, to the values, you have to publicly slay it. Like you
mm,
have to go through an exercise to publicly slay it. So I knew that about values, right? So and I've used that concept about values in terms of how do you instill values in a company in terms of thinking of those four believable, observable sacrifices. I didn't think till I read your study about, well, I got to think about that with trust. How am I spending money on trust? How am I spending time on trust? How am I spending my ego on trust? How am I
mm,
spending a previous value on trust?
mm. It's so good, Alex. You're getting me thinking about one of the other drivers at the organizational level was what we describe as emotional maturity, which
Mhm.
fundamentally was about being both truthful and honest and also caring and compassionate. And it's like that being able to do those two things at once was such a powerful thing. Do you have a quick thought on that?
I do, because young leaders make the following mistake, and experienced leaders fall back into this mistake, and I fall back into this mistake all the time, which is if I can just get them to like me, they'll do anything for me.
Hmm.
And then you realize they don't need to like you, they need to be successful. And that doesn't mean that you should be a jerk. But if you love your people, you're willing to sit down and have a hard conversation with them. If you want them to like you, then it's very self-centered. It's
Hmm.
it's all about how they think about me, right? How
Yeah.
do they think about me is not a love language.
Yeah.
What do you need to do to be successful? Even if I have to, I mean, I'm having a conversation right now with an individual, and these are really difficult conversations. But if this person doesn't adjust to what we're talking about, they're not going to be successful, right?
Yeah.
So I what I tell our folks is when you're leading, are you leading with like or are you leading with love? If you're
Hmm.
leading with like, you're worried about whether they like you and you're thinking about yourself. If you're leading with love, you care enough about them to have the real difficult conversation. And that's how I'll know.
Yeah. That is so much wisdom there, Alex. Love the way your brain works. Thank you so much for that.
Such a rich conversation. Alex, thank you so much. We want the people who are listening or watching to know what is the best way for them to connect with you. I know we mentioned your book, but what are ways that they can connect with you and the work that you do?
Yeah, easiest is on X or what we used to call Twitter, and you can tell how long ago I joined Twitter because my handle is at Shootman. It's Shotman, and that probably tells you I joined right after the South by Southwest show when it was invented. But just reach out to me
Yep.
there. We'll
Yeah,
connect, or in LinkedIn is fine as well. But Sabbath, great to see you, and Rob, always great to be
Yeah.
with you. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you so much. So good. And we have one last wild question. Alex, are you in a season of accepting yourself or changing yourself?
I think you're always changing yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.